In Hour Zero, where I try to introduce Homeric poetry to people who may never have been exposed to the Iliad and the Odyssey, even in translation, my idea was to get a sense of the medium, which is not a readable medium because Homeric poetry in its historical context was meant to be heard, not read. And there are various ways of describing it, call it oral poetry or call it a very specialized kind of oral poetry, but the important thing is that we as modern readers just don't get the medium. And so I thought before we get into hours 1 through 24, it would be important to do some kind of big, grand, cover everything introduction. But at the same time, in this introduction, I wanted to get people already interested in my technique of using close readings of very specific parts of the text in order to get an idea of the overall meaning of the text. And so I chose 8 such texts, and they're all very famous, well, some more famous than others. As with the 24 hours, I number these sample texts by letters of the alphabet, so it's texts A through H. What I like to do is just go over those passages or texts and go through them, try to do close readings, try to exemplify the principle of having to read out of the text, not into the text, and also try to say why I picked the passages that I picked. And in this case, my dialogic partners were Jeff Emanuel and Claudia Phylos, who are former students. They took former versions of the project that we're engaged with here. And as very perceptive fellow learners, they really got the hang of how to ask very incisive questions that go to the core of what this whole project is all about. Like, what's at stake in the Iliad? What's at stake for the number one hero? But what's at stake for some very secondary bit player hero as well? How does Achilles see himself as the prototype for the ultimate heroic experiment, which is the way I look at the Iliad? And how is he self-conscious about it?
So Greg, can you tell us a bit about why you chose these particular 8 passages as the focus passages for Hour Zero?
Well, here I was trying to introduce all of Homeric poetry to people who may not ever have read the Iliad and the Odyssey. So I thought, how can I talk about the Iliad and the Odyssey and show some very representative pieces of text? And sometimes I call them passages, sometimes I call them text. When I number them, I call them text. And all 8 of these that I have selected are what in popular culture would be parts of the greatest hits, so to speak, of the Iliad and Odyssey. So for example, if you look at text A of this introduction to Homeric poetry, which I call appropriately Hour Zero, there it is, the first few verses of the Iliad. In fact, the first 10 verses. So Iliad, scroll 1, verses 1 through 10.
Anger, goddess, sing it, of Achilles, son of Peleus, disastrous anger that made countless pains for the Achaeans, and many steadfast lives it drove down to Hades, heroes' lives, but their bodies it made prizes for the dogs, and for all birds, and the will of Zeus was reaching its fulfillment. Sing, starting from the point where the two, I see it now, first had a falling out, engaging in strife. I mean Agamemnon, the son of Atreus, lord of men, and radiant Achilles. So, which one of the gods was it who impelled the two to fight with each other in strife? It was Apollo, the son of Leto and of Zeus. For he, infuriated at the king Agamemnon, caused an evil disease to arise throughout the mass of warriors, and the people were getting destroyed.
I try to replicate in my translation the fact that the very first word of the Iliad is menis, which means anger, a special kind of anger, a cosmic anger. We'll talk more about that.
That man, tell me, O Muse, the song of that man, that versatile man, who in very many ways veered from his path and wandered off far and wide after he had destroyed the sacred citadel of Troy. Many different cities of many different people did he see, getting to know different ways of thinking. Many were the pains he suffered in his heart while crossing the sea, struggling to merit the saving of his own life and his own homecoming, as well as the homecoming of his comrades. But do what he might, he could not save his comrades, even though he very much wanted to, for they perished through their own deeds of sheer recklessness, disconnected as they were because of what they did to the cattle of the sun god Helios. They ate them. So the god deprived them of their day of homecoming. Starting from any single point of departure, O goddess, daughter of Zeus, tell me, as you have told those who came before me.
And then if we go to text B, look at that. The first quote-unquote word is man. All right, in English you have to say the man, but in the original Greek, andra, the man, and that's the subject of that epic, just as the subject of the Iliad is the anger of Achilles. The subject of the Odyssey is the man who is Odysseus. So there you are. That's why I chose text B to be the first few verses of the Odyssey. And in fact, just as with the Iliad, it's the first 10 verses, nice and symmetrical.
And so those first words are so key. The epics are telling us right away.
These epics are, both of them, Iliad and the Odyssey, telling what the subject is with the first word. In the case of the Iliad, first word of 15,000 plus verses. In the case of the Odyssey, the first word of 12,000 plus verses. Pretty good.
And now tell me, O Muses, who live in your Olympian abodes, since you are goddesses, and you were there, and you know everything, but we only hear the kleos, and we hear nothing. Who are the princes of the Danaans?
Now, look at text C for hour 0. This is where Hector says, there'll be a memory of the time that my fire nearly destroyed not just the Achaeans, but the entirety of Greek civilization. You see, if the fire of Hector had reached the ships of the Achaeans that were beached like sitting ducks on the Hellespont, then essentially there would be no more Greeks. And so Hector, this character, is very aware of it. Says, let there be a memory of the time when this was about to happen. And so poetic how the fire will confound the Achaeans, who are the Argives, who are the Danaans, by the smoke.
So by choosing it, you're saying there's something very important about memory for both.
It's all important because this isn't just memory, this is poetic memory, and as we'll see when we get to hour 2, it's a kind of total recall, if I may use a science fiction term.
Ah me, the pitiful one. Ah me, the mother, so sad it is, of the very best. I gave birth to a faultless and strong son, the very best of heroes, and he shot up equal to a seedling. I nurtured him like a shoot in the choicest spot of the orchard, only to send him off on curved ships to Troy to fight Trojan men. And I will never be welcoming him back home as a returning warrior, back to the house of Peleus.
Let's go to text D of hour 0, which is where Thetis, the mother of Achilles, is speaking. And she's not just speaking in terms of the medium, she's actually singing a song of lament. And we'll talk a lot more about lament later. But I love the fact that as she is lamenting Achilles, who's not even dead yet, she is comparing him to a tender young shoot. or seedling. And I'm pretty deliberate on why I use not just the translation seedling, but also shoot for imagining the hero as a beautiful young plant.
Okay.
Okay? So there it is, and even the specifics of the language that she uses, Thetis uses in her Song of Lament for Achilles is not even dead yet. Some of the specific language like anedramen, which I translate as he shot up, is a kind of violent vegetal activity that you would associate with mutant phenomena, not necessarily natural phenomena. Sure, a growing plant is natural, but this is an unnatural growth. It's just so much quicker and so much more vibrant.
So we're going to be thinking about what's natural and what's unnatural?
Very much so. I try never to use the word supernatural. I'll try to use superhuman because even the superhuman realm can still be a function of nature.
This is an example maybe of where we're going to be thinking in extremes as well.
Very much extremes. And as we'll see in our working definition of the hero is extreme. That's definitely one of the major characteristics. When we talk about the growth spurt of Achilles, I'm tempted to say that it's an unnatural growth spurt, but what I'm really trying to say, it's part of nature, but it's exaggerated, extreme, as Jeff said. We'll get back to that, but I wanted to expose people as soon as possible to the idea that a hero is the subject of lament. And lament will be a very important part of our agenda.